Hello and welcome to week 8 of Ad and PR Account Management. I'm your instructor, Michael Betker. Here's what we got going on for week 8. Now, week 7, we spent a lot of time talking about the creative brief. We'll touch on that, but we'll pivot and we'll move to actually developing, reviewing, and presenting creative work. So what springs out of the creative brief oftentimes, if we've done our job well, is good creative. So we are going to talk about the role that the account person plays within this process. So we'll start by talking about how to brainstorm. Now, a lot of times it's the account person who sets up the brainstorming and does a lot of that coordination. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, of course, we'll talk about how to evaluate creative work. And that's from your book, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. We kind of touch on that in both those chapters there. But there is a way to do this creatively and to good effect. And then last thing we'll do is talk about presenting creative. And right at the end of this lecture here, I will talk about the final project, which is all about presenting creative for your selected brand. All right, so you guys are hard at work on this. I know it's due on Sunday, but your creative briefs, let me know if you have any questions on that. But obviously, a super important document for what we do here in advertising for both the client and for your organization as well. So all the creative folks who you want to turn loose in a meaningful way. So how do you do that? Obviously, with a good creative brief. So that's the first clue. So you guys are working on that. By Sunday, you should have that done. But what happens then when you've got that done? Well, what we do then is we pivot. We use that. We get it approved by the client. And we have an agreement on the table for us then to go forward confidently to create some killer creative. And part of that is just finding the big idea for any campaign and how you come up with that. So first thing you want to do once you have the creative brief is to gather the team and your creative kind of firepower within the organization you work with and begin uncovering those big ideas. Now, you may have this in your mind already. As you were writing the creative brief, maybe you've got a couple big ideas kind of in your hip pocket. In some cases, that's true. In other cases, you might not have the big idea necessarily. Maybe you just got the information you need to uncover that big idea. Either way, we're looking for it. We're looking for the big thing that you can hang your hat on from a creative standpoint. We call it the big idea. Some things about the big idea that you guys should know. Certainly, it's simple. Now, I often refer to the Dove campaign for Real Beauty as a good example of a big idea that's rooted in what we call insights. Now, we've talked about insights already as well in this class. That's really where the big ideas come from. Most often are these data-driven insights about your target audience. But they are simple, and they're single-minded in a lot of cases. And then, of course, what we're looking for once we've got that big idea is to come up with a way of conveying that idea uniquely. Another point to think about here with these big ideas, and you see a lot of campaigns where you have multiple iterations or multiple versions of this big idea being expressed through creative means. We call that having legs. And essentially what that means is it can cater to different audiences and media or versions. So in other words, this campaign can go on for a long time and can really be meaningful to a lot of different audiences and work within different medias. Relevance, originality, and impact. So are all things we want to look at as well. Spring again from our creative brief and from our big idea. What we're looking for downstream from those ideas is a concept. So concept can be a lot of different things, but it really is, at the heart of it, a unique way of stating the promise from the brief. So you've got a very matter-of-fact statement in the brief, which then can be kind of flipped around and used in a creative way through ideation to bring that point home to your target audience. Divergent thinking, in a way. That's what we do here. And we'll talk about brainstorming in a second here, but that kind of helps you get to those ideas. Oftentimes, these concepts are unexpected and insightful, and they make the simple mystifying and the complex evident. All right, so most often what happens is when you're the account person and you're long in the tooth, in other words, you've been doing this a while, Especially, you'll find yourself driving these creative ideation sessions or brainstorming sessions. So, toward that end, you want to obviously get the group together and create a favorable environment. If you're lucky enough to work at an agency, a lot of times they have spaces set up specifically for this type of work. Several companies I work with, they all have their own version of that, but one company I worked for had a meat locker. They called it the meat locker, and actually had a bunch of fake pieces of meat hanging from hooks in a room that was designed to resemble an actual meat locker. But essentially, what you want to do is create, if you don't have the luxury of that meat locker type atmosphere, finding a good place to be first is an important piece, right? So creating a good group climate. It's also important to create, especially if you got a mixed company, right? You've got your group and maybe you've got the client group. And oftentimes that's the case where you've got mixed company where you want to kind of get people to know one another and feel more comfortable. So often icebreakers, things like you've seen teachers do in the beginning of the semester. It doesn't have to be too fancy, but certainly what you're looking for here is just to create kismet and camaraderie within the group. The other thing too is you want to enlist and find as many folks within your group, and even maybe on the client side, but especially on your side, folks who can clearly articulate ideas that come out of these meetings. So find as many scribes as you can find, and as many flip charts as well, just to capture those ideas. Now, whiteboards work just as well. Either way, you want to capture these ideas because they are gold in a lot of ways. All right, now write up your problem clearly and precisely. Now you've got your group. They're all prepped and ready to go. State it out there. Just lay it up there on the board, your problem. Make sure everyone can see it and understands the problem. Then I think you're ready to go, right? So what you want to do in this case here is then, of course, encourage a constant flow of ideas. So another thing you could say is there are no bad ideas. I know everybody says that all the time, but you may have some folks in your group who are a little reticent to share their good creative ideas for fear of looking or sounding stupid. So you want to put their mind at ease immediately. There are no bad ideas. The other point I want to make is don't put a time limit on the session. This only adds pressure and will cut off the flow. So leave it open-ended. And in fact, it's smart to do this over a lunch period time where the food comes in and it's sort of a fluid sort of experience. And see if you can't get the extra time you need to not create this hurried sense about the group. I think I mentioned this already, but I'll say it again. Suspend criticism. All ideas, no matter how crazy they may seem, should be encouraged and recorded without comment or criticism from the group. So we're looking for even those wild and crazy ideas that might or might not lead to something different. And like I said before, we're looking for divergent thinkers here and creating opportunities with different disparate ideas. A lot of times you have people making connections between two crazy ideas that create this third new, not quite as crazy idea. But suspending criticism is the key. And of course, also, our goal here in most cases is to collect as many ideas as possible. Now, you might go in with one idea already. That's short-sighted thinking, I would say. If you got a great idea, put it in your hip pocket or put it out there on the board, but say we can do better, and then try to do better. But ultimately, the goal here early on especially is to capture and collect as many ideas as possible. Some more guidelines just to think about here. You don't want to evaluate ideas, so if somebody throws an idea up there, leave it be in terms of your evaluation or your overall assessment of the idea itself. That's only going to short circuit people's future ideas in the group. And then, of course, build on others' ideas as well. So if somebody has a good idea that you immediately have a thought that pops into your head, you want to, or others do, you want to make sure that they feel comfortable kind of building off of other people's ideas. And again, this is not a popularity contest or made the best idea win necessarily. It is a collaborative effort, so you want to always be focusing on that as well. Now, there are many, many ways to brainstorm, so we're not going to go through that here. Just know that every place, every agency has a number of these things that they do. The one that we most often see at agencies is something called sparking, and essentially it's a very simple version of what we do here, but it is just taking ideas and then just throwing them up there on a mortar board, sparking one idea after another like flashes of electricity. And you see here an example of just a whiteboard of different ideas that have come out of the sparking technique. So like I said, there's plenty of others here at our disposal, which we're not going to go through here, but know that brainstorming, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and you'll probably find as you get into this a little bit more, some work better than others for you. All right, let's assume now, let's flash forward here a little bit. You've had a successful creative brief creation and even a brainstorming session, and you've generated a bunch of great ideas that you want to present then to the client. So first thing you're going to have to do then, of course, is someone's got to evaluate. Now, here's the thing about evaluating creative work. Some people out there believe that it's not possible, that creative is an entirely subjective sort of exercise. In other words, it's just a matter of your own opinion as to whether or not it's good creative. Now, I'll say this, in this book, our book actually talks about this at length, and we're going to talk about 20 different indicators that we as account folks can use to evaluate good creative work, okay? So more on that in a little bit here, but let's talk about evaluating creative. First and foremost thing you guys should know is it's not an easy thing to do, to provide feedback to somebody who's put a lot of time and effort and thinking into a creative solution to a problem for the client. So it can be sticky. And one of the big reasons for that is creative folks generally, and this is obviously not always true, but a lot of times creative people tend to be a little bit sensitive about their ideas. So even if they're not, you should be sensitive to their feelings. We certainly don't want to shut them down if you don't believe their creative is on point. That said, it is a fine line between providing good feedback and hurting their feelings. So there's some tips and tricks you can employ. We'll talk about those here. The cool thing you can always do is obviously once you've got that brief nailed down, it is like the Bible for this project and for the client. The clients have agreed to that. Your team has agreed to that as well. If you feel like your creative team is kind of going off tangent and not follow the brief, you can mention that and state in plainclothes language. Listen, I think it's a good idea. However, I think it's maybe a little bit off brief. You can say that, and that's an easy way to kind of mitigate the problem without any emotion. The other thing you can do is learn to critique while keeping the respect of the creative team, and that's, again, not always easy, but choosing words wisely and using inclusive terms versus you, pointing fingers and things like that are all things we can do. But the key here is to maintain good relations to ensure good work in the future. Now, there are plenty of, here's the thing about an agency, there's never a shortage of opinions. And everybody seems to have an idea or opinion about what good creative constitutes. So know this. I'm not going to belabor these here, but I've experienced most of these types of critiques over the course of my career. And you more than likely will as well. So just know that there's lots of folks out there who have an opinion. All right, so this is from chapter 3, this idea of what I call passionate subjectivity. Passion is certainly an important part of what we do in creativity when you're developing a creative concept. And the fact that it's seen oftentimes, advertising is seen as subjective. So I took the time to kind of find this definition so we know what subjective means. Subjective is defined by Merriam-Webster as, quote, peculiar to a particular individual, modified or affected by personal views, experience, or background. So again, it's very much a part of the internal experience one might have with creative. So there's something to that, right? That's why I want to use the word passionate there, right? Or passion. You are going to have a gut reaction, whether positive or negative, to any creative work you might experience. Now, for me, it's I can generally tell pretty quickly, and I'm not always right, but a lot of times, because I use these 20 things we're going to discuss here for evaluating creative, but I use that kind of religiously, and I feel like I've gotten pretty good at discerning what I would consider to be good creative work. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So passionate subjectivity, how you express these feelings is key. Okay, so your gut reactions and how you bring those out to the table, right? If you've got bad input, a bad brief, or a client with bad taste, don't throw a pity party and jump on the advertising subjective bandwagon, right? We honestly have to dig deeper and reach higher. We want to start thinking about our field and creative endeavors as being more objective. And that I'll show you guys how to do that in a second here. But one of the things you can do is certainly be a friend to research. And that's the thing, right? So if you find, like for example, again, the 80% of women who read beauty magazines feel bad about themselves. If your creative is driving that home in a big way, you can mention that basic fact. And facts in general are your friends when it comes to creative. Befriend industry experts as well. So you want to get the facts, and as much as possible, put those on your side. So left brain, right brain, right? Left brain is all the facts. So find those facts and latch onto those and tie those back to the creative if you think it's good. Get close to the consumers, clients, or the customers' clients, rather. So getting to know those folks as well is an important piece of this. And obviously, we talked a lot about your target audience. So the more you know the target audience intimately, the better off you're going to be. Another way of saying that is the art of insightful questioning. And the book calls this the creative credo. So this is Darcy, Ogilvy, Birnbach, the model that they came up with here to get at this idea of insightful questioning. So here's some questions you want to ask to get at that. And again, we're moving from a more subjective understanding of creative toward a more objective sort of point of view that can lead to good decision making with regard to creative. First question: does this advertising position the product simply with clarity and relevance? If you've got a lot of bells and whistles on your storyline, it's probably not being told in the most simple way. So that's one of the first clues, right? It's got to be simple and to the point. Point number 2, is the advertising an extension of the brand? Is it fitting with the brand? Sometimes you get a creative idea that's great, but maybe not the best for the brand in particular, right? So you've got to always look at this through the lens of the brand. If it's a serious brand and it's a funny concept, it may not be a good fit. So that's another clue there. And so maybe you've got a great idea you want to just tuck away and save for another rainy day. Is the ad single-minded? A lot of times you get a lot of things going on. Again, this is again getting back to point 1, but keeping it simple, the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid is a great mantra for any good creative. The next point, does the advertising make a big promise? Is there some kind of benefit attached to that that's meaningful to the consumer? That's the other piece of this, right? Benefits are great if they mean something to the consumer. If there are benefits that don't benefit anybody really, or people don't get excited about that, it's not a good idea. But either way, does the advertising make a big promise and deliver on that promise? Last point on this page here, does the ad contain a big creative idea? So we're looking for ways, like we talked about here, so you've got a big idea. Is there a clever way that you're presenting that to your audience that's going to catch on and maybe go viral, or maybe at least get passed around because it's interesting, funny, or entertaining? A benefit promise delivered in a memorable way is what we're looking for there. Darcy, Ogilvy, and Birnbach continue with these questions here. Does the big creative idea have legs? And again, we've already discussed that, but does it carry well in different media types? Does it have multiple iteration potentials for multiple iterations of the same idea in different ways, et cetera, et cetera? We're looking for those ads that have breathing room. Is the advertising unexpected, different, and unusual? If it's a good idea, but it's been done before, sorry, nice try. Let's keep digging deeper, right? We're looking for some space that we can own in the consumer's minds that uniquely carves us out from the rest. So it's got to be somewhat arresting and unusual to be effective. Is the objective of the ad clear? Are you informing, changing an attitude? And sometimes ads, for all their creativity, can get lost on the average person. So really, you've got to make sure. And maybe sometimes there's a tweak to the script or to the idea to make it more clear. But sometimes that gets lost. So you got to be kind of the voice of reason as the account person, making sure the objective of the ad is clear. The next point, do the ads have visual verbal magnetism? So magnetism and certainly the quality of the creative execution. A lot of times we're talking about graphic or the written word, right? So we're looking for those two items to be on point. That gets noticed and remembered. And if you've ever taken my 241 class, electronic media copywriting, to be verbs are really not a very strong way of articulating your position. And certainly we want to make our best effort with the visual as well. Last one here doesn't have inherent drama. Kind of gets at some of these other ones here, but we're looking for a way of creating if it's a 30-second ad, you want those 30 seconds to be awe-inspiring and emotional. Does it have an emotional connection? So again, we're looking for those higher order connections with the brands, and that's what really sets apart a good ad from a great ad, or a campaign from a great campaign. We're looking for those higher order emotional connections that good campaigns can make for brands. Does the ad reward the prospect independent of the product? So in other words, okay, I understand the product now, it works well, but am I also entertained? Am I glad I spent the time watching this ad? And a lot of times you see people weighing in on ads, particularly for the Super Bowl, where you've got people spending lots of money to create these ads and to entertain, hopefully, their target audience. And people weigh in. We go to the water cooler and they say, yep, I was entertained, or maybe I wasn't entertained. And here's why. So you got to make sure. One thing you can do, obviously, is to do quick consumer testing to make sure that it is entertaining and it's not off point. Last point here, is it right for the target audience and medium? Is it readable? Is branding strong enough? So all of these things here you need to be asking. Again, it really comes down to the account person's voice of reason a lot of times in a creative environment to kind of pull it back to earth. Does it speak to current customers and prospects? So if in this case here below, the ad is about losing love handles, and it's a government program, right? So I would assume that if they targeted this correctly, let's say they targeted folks in their 50s and 60s who could stand to lose a few pounds, this ad would probably speak to them pretty well. Is there a compelling offer, call to action, clear response? Again, looking at this one here, the call to action is clearly smallstep.gov to get to that point. So I would say that, again, satisfies the requirement. And last one here, does it represent the company's character and values? I would say this, obviously, for any government program, certainly helping out people kind of overcome these types of problems, again, probably follows that criteria. More questions. Does the ad show painstaking craftsmanship? The ad below, I think, does. I think it's a really neat looking ad there, and obviously it's talking about one thing, one of our other points as well, which in this case is precision parking. Park Assist by Volkswagen. So you got a porcupine here parking amidst several fish who ostensibly would, if they didn't have this Park Assist, would probably find their demise on that whiteboard there. So that's an important piece. Good design. Does the ad have talk value, buzz, pop culture potential? Sometimes they call that the water cooler effect. Do people chat about it quite a bit? Is it something that's going to create a stir and drive discussion organically around the brand? We look for that as well. Some call that also viral. Is it strategically driven and creatively consistent with the integrated promotion plan? Does it fit with everything else? Now, I work with companies that have done things that have run counter to the larger overall strategy. And that's not always a good thing. In fact, a lot of times it confuses consumers. So you want to make sure you are consistent with your creativity. All right, so those are the points. There are 20 there. And if you want to look at, again, read these through in more detail, these are my take on these. But again, the goal here is to arrive at an objective point of view about creative. All right, so now, moving forward here in time, you've got the creative brief, you've done that, you've created brainstormed, you came up with a bunch of ideas, and you've settled on a few, and you've decided you're ready to go and bring that creative work to the client in a meaningful way. So here's where the rubber hits the road for us as account folks, being able to present that work in a creative way itself. So I would say this, great presentation skills are extremely important to what we do as account folks. So if you're not comfortable getting up in front of a crowd, and I'll say this, that's something that can be learned. When I was in high school and even junior high school, especially junior high school, I was terrified to public speak. And I certainly got over that at some point in my life, but some people are just not as comfortable up there in front. I would say practice makes perfect. So the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And the more comfortable you become presenting creative ideas. But there's a process, and our chapter 3 goes through that. So we'll go through that here. But know this, if you're really curious to know what I'm looking for, or what people are looking for, harken back to what you learned in 110. Most of you guys have probably taken 110, right? Making good eye contact, speaking extemporaneously, which means basically having a conversation with your audience, like I'm doing now, frankly, are all important factors there. You want to you want to be perceived as approachable and conversational within the context of your pitch. You must know how to persuade without annoying and how to read people. That's the other thing too, just taking note of body language and other nonverbals that you might be losing your audience in some way, and maybe you just went too dense, or maybe things got a little too heavy, and you see body types, bodies slumping in chairs. All are good ideas, and maybe you take a break. So you can do that. I would say if you see that kind of behavior, you want to say, "Oh, let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back to it." That can reset the table and get a fresh start. Another point I want to make here, sometimes when you present creative work alone, sometimes you do it with a creative team. It's really dependent upon how you want to handle things. I've seen it done both ways. I personally like involving the creative team, particularly for portions of this. Now, strategy stuff should all be the account folks, in my opinion. But maybe it's a good idea to bring the creative team in. You'll probably win brownie points, and if they're decent enough presenters, they can probably carry the day with your help. So, but here's a good screenshot. I know we've seen this already, but one of my all-time favorite episodes of the pitch, involving the ad store in this case, who I thought should have won that pitch. But my assessment of that is they lost precisely because they didn't do as good a job with the pitch as they could have. Now, obviously, the principal Paul there, he does it all, right? He's the creative guy. He's been doing this for a long time, and his creative was right on point. And yet, they didn't win the pitch. Now, why is that? My theory, and it's a well-thought one, is that he didn't follow the rules as well as he could with these 4 stages here. So the setup, the reveal, the justification, the close. And specifically in the very beginning, when he revealed probably a little bit too early his big idea, which was trash can. And trash can not in the pejorative sense, but trash can meaning trash can do a lot of things, as we know. So trash can. It was a great creative idea that I think got lost. And that inset picture there of the woman who was clearly sending some nonverbals to him that he was not really hitting the mark as well as he could have. And we see afterwards with the results of this that they felt that he was just missing the brief a little bit, which was less about social media, more about social media than what the ad store presented. So the 4 points here, just to not to belabor this, but the 4 points that we want to follow here. First, the setup, right? And you got to do a good job there. You got to set the hook. If you imagine this as being a fishing analogy, right? You got to dangle that hook out there and make it attractive. Put a nice worm on there and maybe in some kind of a shiny object. But then you want to sort of hold that back. Hold back the reveal until the right moment. So the setup's vitally important, and maybe you're setting up the problem with facts. Either way, the setup is a portion of time in the beginning of your pitch. The reveal, obviously, that's when you say, all right, here's our big ta-da, and the justification, then, of course, the close, when you ask for the business. All right, so the setup first, done by the account team, almost exclusively, I would say, and that's your job as the account person. So setting it up in a way that's meaningful, and you guys will have a chance to do this here at this class toward the end of the semester with the final project where you'll set up your brand pitch. More on that here in this lecture. This is where we review the background, right? You talk about all the things you've learned through the creative brief process and from the client. Challenges, objectives, information about the audience, any insights you might have come through, marketing environment, strategies discussed, all the stuff that you think is pertinent to your discussion. Obviously, as the account person, having the creative idea in your head will allow you to kind of reverse engineer that, right? So you want to pick and choose the things that make the most sense, that lead up to a head nod, a positive head nod from the client about your decision. Reminding the client what was approved, right, so long ago. Sometimes they tend to forget about the brief, about the things you discussed. I would say this is important. A lot of agencies forget this part, and this is why it's good to have an account person who's focused on the data as much as they are the creative. Emphasizing the research findings, right, wherever possible. Anything tied back to the target audience that's meaningful, and maybe it's something, if it's primary research that you've done, into the target audience that nobody else in the category has, that's certainly important to mention as you wend your way towards making that pitch. Provide reference points, media types, time of year, competitive activity, all that stuff. Anything that you think is pertinent to set this up in a meaningful way. You are the lead up to the creative, right? Whether you're presenting the creative as well, or you're going to set up somebody else to present the creative. Either way, you're the one who's saying, all right, this case is airtight for this creative idea we're going to pitch to you guys. All right, client expectations. What are they thinking? They often provide hints, direction as to what they expect to see in the presentation. A lot of times you get emails or maybe phone calls, but there should be no vacuum there. There should be no misunderstanding about that if you're doing your job correctly. And part of our job as account folks is to really, be sure we're aware of any and all expectations of the client before the pitch. If your ideas don't meet those, you'll be seen as arrogant and not listening. It's amazing how many times we see this very thing happening where the agency thinks they know best, and they're hoping that their creative idea is just going to overrule everything else and win the day. A lot of times that simply doesn't happen. If there's a strong reason not to follow the client's need, you need to make sure this is clear before showing the creative. Something called creative inoculation. Inoculation theory, if we know, is obviously putting a little piece of a virus within the body so that it reacts to it, and then of course prevents the body from getting the actual disease itself. Same thing with creative inoculation, and really how you describe that is why the direction was dangerous. We listened and started there, but found this. So in other words, hey, we wanted to let you know that we were aware that you said don't go this direction and that was dangerous. But that said, we got to show you this. This is important for you to know this, right? So you kind of save yourself from getting busted. So there's a way to get around that idea if you really want to present some kind of edgy creative. Last point there is the account manager's job. It's the account manager's job to make sure the client is not ticked off before the creative is presented. So you really want to set them up in a good way so they're really receptive to the message. Now this is a picture from one of the upcoming episodes of The Pitch, so I won't spoil this, but it features an agency of all women called Womankind, and they did a phenomenal job presenting creative and preparing for their pitch. So the reveal is vitally important now. So here's some things about that when you present the creative. The creative work presented in all its glory is what it is. It should look fabulous, and obviously, if you're working with brands, you want to make sure the brand is represented correctly, and of course, by extension, then using things like the proper font and all the other things that you do, the ticky-tack sort of tactical things. So we have to focus on as account folks. Should be a top of mind there. Creatives should be enthusiastic about their work, and usually you don't have to worry about that too much. They generally are very enthusiastic, but if they're not, you got to be the one kind of rising that tide. Should play right off the set up and reinforce points made in the setup when explaining ideas. So again, number one reason why the account folks should derive the entirety of the pitch. Most often, I was the one making the presentation from top to bottom, back to front, and all the points in between, just because I wanted to lead people down a pathway. It was a very linear sort of process from A to Z. But obviously, you want to set up the creative team, if they're indeed pitching the creative, to make a good pitch. The justification, all right? So afterwards, you're probably going to get some feedback. In this case here, this is the episode you haven't seen yet, but this is the client for Sea Wonder, which is the name of the company, the brand that Womankind was vying business for. Tough customer, and we'll talk more about him, but generally speaking, you may get some pushback, and there might be some discussion around the creative ideas that you present. So the client could give reactions and ask questions, which often happens, which is good. So they want that. And maybe it's not a perfect hit, or maybe it's a complete miss. Either way, we as account folks want to kind of assess what's being said, taking that in, of course, addressing those objections as needed. Either way, throughout the process, you want to be confident and enthusiastic and as much as possible support your direction. But taking in, of course, the feedback from the client as well is important. And maybe there's a way to kind of re-rack if things didn't go as well as you had hoped. Of course, then the close, if things did go well, that's a good time to maybe think about the ask. And the ask could be, hey, well, what do you think about that? This seems pretty successful. It seems like you guys really like this. Uh, Next steps could be discussing some more brass tacks in terms of a contract of some kind. Or maybe the client wants to think it over a little bit more, right? And that's okay. You want to give them that space. Make sure your leave behind is complete. So in other words, a lot of times we have a written document along with any creative materials. In the case of Womankind here, they left a bunch of boards for the creative for the team to look at after they left. Remind the client of the schedule, because a lot of times they forget that we're under a deadline. So you want to make sure that they're aware of the time crunch if there is one. And then, of course, follow up the next day with a phone call. A lot of times, creative teams that are there don't get the full Monty directly from the client. They usually withhold the full disclosure of what they feel about the creative until after the creative team has left. And that's your job to take that in and then kind of bring that back to the creative team, which is another part we'll talk about. But it's not always easy giving feedback from the client back to your team. Expect changes without question, and that's frankly a good thing. If they're changing things you made, now I will say this, if they make bad changes, that's different. And you want to fight hand tooth and nail if needed. But in most cases, they're going to make some changes that you can work with. And if that's the case, that to me is the best thing ever, because it makes them feel like they've contributed and they're something a part of the process. And that's a huge, huge win for your agency if you've got people making decision makers on the client side, providing feedback and taking some ownership over the creative. That's good. Again, creative rationale. So a lot of times you'll be called into question as to whether or not it's on point with the brief. It's important to write up whether you give it to the client or not. And of course, account works with creative to truly understand all the creative thinking and details. So we want to basically kind of justify the creative decision we've made. And again, this is where the right brain and left brain comes in, right? So creative is good, but it should be rooted in some sort of strategic fact or facts. All right, so I mentioned this is coming up here. Giving client feedback to the team. Obviously, it all turns to diplomacy is the key here. And if you haven't cultivated that, that's definitely something you can learn. And if the client is changing strategy, do you need a new brief? That's the other thing as well. Sometimes clients do kind of fly in the face of that. Maybe something changed. Either way, you've got to kind of assess the situation as best as possible and bring that back to the team. Project 2, presenting creative. Now you guys have selected brands and you've already started doing your research into your brands. And this week you're working on your creative brief for your brand, right? So that's the foundation from which this project springs, okay? It's worth 100 points. Obviously, spelling is important, but so we'll talk about this more. But essentially what you're doing in a nutshell here is you're presenting creative ideas as if they are new ideas. So in other words, let's take, for example, Snickers. Let's say you pick that brand, Snickers. Lots and lots of different ads out there for Snickers, right, over the years. If that's your brand, I'd like you to start thinking about which of these creative campaigns from their past that you would like to consider presenting as new within the context of your presentation. So you're basically taking information that you've learned about the brand, and then you're going to pick at minimum 3 campaign ideas or campaigns rather that have happened in the past. And you're going to pretend that they are new ideas that came from your creative team. Okay, simple as that. So I'd like you to suspend disbelief, which basically means I'd like you to pretend that you're really actually making a real live pitch with creative that your team just came up with. And although it may be a dated campaign, now in most cases you like to pick campaigns that are more current, so it seems more current and consistent. But nonetheless, you're going to pitch those ideas in those videos, or maybe it's a print ad campaign. It doesn't matter what it is, but concepts that spring from the brief that you're creating this week. Okay? Presentation should be 7 to 10 minutes long, and that's kind of the key here. Now, obviously, this is an online course, so you're going to want to get creative with how you do this. But what I suggest that you guys do for this and your book report, frankly, is to consider going to maybe Heidi or one of these other locations with classrooms that you can turn on and hardware, and then make your presentation. Have somebody in the audience there, which you'll have to have 4 of, with your cell phone, and then have them record you presenting your creative presentation. Okay, that's how I would do that. Now, you could do it other ways as well. You could do it in your room. if you want, or maybe find a quiet place to do that if you want, and then use your laptop. But I would say the nice thing about presenting with a screen is that you can actually record the ads without too much trouble. So I would say seek out and find that, and let me know if you have any questions on that piece. How we're grading this, right? You're understanding the client brand based on research you've done all semester is one important fact, and I have an example I'll show you here in a second for Dunkin' Donuts to give you an idea what I'm looking for there. Of course, your ability to articulate the strategic considerations, right? Things like consumer insights. What's the brand promise? Who's your target audience? What are the key objectives? What's the tone? All that stuff should be firmly in your mind as you make these pitches. Of course, presentation skills, right? So are you making good eye contact? Are you speaking conversationally? Did you practice your presentation a few times? Are you dressed professionally? Do you present yourself professionally? Do you use professional language versus slang terms like dude? All of these things are important. Right now, obviously, response to questions won't happen here as much unless you want to have somebody for your audience do that. But primarily what we're looking for here is just a solid extemporaneous presentation. All right, so Andrea Beck is a past student of mine who recently graduated and is now working out into advertising. Believe it or not, her brand was Dunkin'. So quickly, I want to talk about Dunkin' Donuts. Now, obviously, one thing she mentioned was that Dunkin' shortened its name from Dunkin' Donuts to Dunkin' because, frankly, if you think about the brand and the changes they've gone through, it's not just about donuts anymore. It's about many other things as well, including breakfast foods and coffee and so on and so forth. They wanted to become more of a destination point for folks during drive times. So she gave a bit of a background here for Dunkin', which is an interesting way to start. I would say not bad to show you understand kind of what's going on with the company. And then flashing forward here, she took us toward kind of some more current facts about Dunkin' Donuts and some of the things that are happening with the brand currently. She spent some time kind of riffing off this here, the target audience, which I thought was good. So in her assessment there, primary audience was teens, 15 to 18. I can tell you, judging from my daughter, that's true. And then, of course, working class folks who also like to go to Dunkin'. People with busy lives and tight schedules is what she discussed there, and kind of went through a more detailed description anecdotally. The tone, quick, reliable, affordable, trendy. And then, of course, she had a collage. And again, she was speaking extemporaneously here, which is why she did so well. And then she launched into her first concept. So she explained the concept and then showed the concept. So these two clips down here below, she played those clips and then discussed the objective. Same thing for the second one here. The concept, this case here, Instagram, she used that as an example of a campaign idea. And then discussed that. And then the third one here, or just more examples. And the third one here is Pick Me Up Afternoon Slump is what she called this one here. Now, one thing I'll say is you can, if you have the gumption or the desire, you could make up your own campaign idea if you want and execute that. So that's another fun thing you could do with this. You don't have to. All you need to do is pick three that are fit your brand and fit your presentation. But several students over the years, quite a few actually, have had fun and created their own campaign idea based on that, which shows me they're really thinking hard about the brand. So it's a nice idea there. She actually did a fourth one here called D&D Perks, so she overachieved and then kind of wrapped up there. So she had 4 good ideas she presented, which you can do. Primary thing here is you want to keep it to around 10 minutes if you could, and again, speak extemporaneously and thank them for the business. Say it again, too, you want to stay in character while you're presenting these things, so that's an important fact as well. Present like you're presenting to Dunkin' or whomever. All right, that's it for this week. Just quickly want to mention this week, discussion post 5 is due. We're reviewing another episode of The Pitch, so have fun with that one. That's a good one. Also, assignment 4, Creative Brief, is due on Sunday this week. I'd like you to start reading Chapter 4 in the Dickinson book as well. All right, that's all I got for you guys. Have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions. We'll talk to you soon.